Good evening and welcome to this special session of the Awarelogue Lecture Forum. On this particular session of the Awarelogue Lecture Forum, we are focusing on a significant anniversary. This is an anniversary of an organization which Sri Lanka is a dialogue partner, and that is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. In this particular year, we are marking a milestone of the SEO, and we are very fortunate to be connecting up with a scholar who has the potential of the SEO and also looking at its impact in the 21st century. And we will be examining the role of the SEO, how the SEO has come into being, how the SEO has become a grouping that remains sometimes, we might argue, under the radar, but no doubt an organization which is of absolute importance in the bigger picture of understanding what is happening in the Asian century. I would like at the very beginning to say a special word of thank you to very close friend, Rostislav at the Russian Embassy, who has taken the trouble to assist us in making the connection with Dr. Yury Kulintsev today. Thank you so much, Rostislav, for the efforts that you took and for the Embassy for also making this possible. If I were to speak a few words to introduce our guest speaker today, he is the holder of an MBA in Management in Asia, a PhD in Political Sciences in Russia. He is currently a research fellow at the Northeast Asian Strategic Issues and SEO Center in the Institute of Far Eastern Studies at the Russian Academy of Sciences. He's also an expert of the Russian International Affairs Council. His research interests include actual problems of the Asia-Pacific region, the SEO development process, contemporary Russian-Chinese relations, and also looks at the dynamics of the BRI. He's a participant of a number of international conferences and workshops, and he has engaged in research across the board, whether it has been in Russian and Chinese dialogue. He has also participated in the China-Mongolia-Russia think tank forum and was a scholar at the visiting program for young sinologists organized by the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences. Dr. Kulintsev, we are indeed honored that you've taken time to join us today in what should be a busy day for you over there. But thank you once again for joining us, and we look forward to listening to you and having a very interactive session on the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and its impact in the 21st century. Over to you, Dr. Kulintsev.
Thank you, George, for your introduction. Yeah, to start talking about Shanghai Cooperation Organization, I think it's important to look on the origin of the SEO. And here we should go back to the USSR collapse. And after USSR collapsed, there was an area without control over the military objects. And this area was the area which we are now calling as Central Asian states. You know, the young states, they were thinking about the internal issues, internal problems. But those military bases with military equipment and with ammunition, it became stolen. Some of those items were sold on the black market, and that was a problem for the government, for the local government. And this area has no international rules to control these kind of situations. And actually there was no direct international laws to control the spread of this armory and ammunition over the borders. You know, there was a civil war in Tajikistan in the 90s, and Russia was involved in the internal conflict in Chechnya. That's why this problem was important for the government. And China, as a boundary states, was also worried about this kind of situation. The main reason to set up this kind of agreement was to guarantee stability and security in the area. And in 1996, the confidence building agreement in the bordering area was signed, and 5 states participated in signing this agreement. Those are Central Asian states, Russia, and China. And a year later, in 1997, the reduction of armed forces agreement in the boundary areas was also signed. And starting from that period, the heads of in that time 5 states started to organize meetings on the annual basis. In 2001, the head of the Uzbekistan was invited to participate in this dialogue, and so-called Shanghai Six Group was organized. I would remember that the main reason for that time was to secure stability of the area. But thanks to our diplomats and ministers of foreign affairs who was thinking about the agreement, they added political agendas there, they added economical agendas there, and cultural cooperation there. That's why SEO in 2001 was established as a classical example of the international organization. And starting from that period, we can say that it was the first stage of the SEO development organization. I would call this stage or this phase of the organization development as an institutionalization period. In 2002, the charter of SEO was signed, and in this charter, the basic rules and the basic mechanisms of the organization, how it's functioning, how the decisions are making, were written. And it took several years to start the organization to function. Actually, the first budget of the SEO was established only in 2004, 3 years later after the organization was established. And in 2004, the secretariat of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization was opened in Beijing. And secretariat is a constantly working body of the SEO. And that was the important milestone for the organization. For the next time, the important tasks facing organization was the recognition of the international society. It's important for organization to be recognized. Otherwise, it's just one of those many organizations. And SEO applied for the United Nations General Assembly observer status. United Nations provides this kind of status for Red Cross and for other important organizations. And once SEO gets it, it means that SEO was officially recognized by the international society. Actually, during this time, organization starts to feel some kind of attention from the world society. You know, European countries, they feel that SEO could potentially be a new world polar. And some people call SEO as the Eastern NATO. Some Western experts call that SEO is a military bloc, and that this group is organized against particularly other countries. But actually, on the other side, many regional countries, they wanted to apply for the membership of this organization. And till 2004, there was no mechanism of expansion for SEO. And they have to develop how to do it, how to receive new members for the organization. In 2004 was introduced the regulations on the observer status, and later many other states and countries applied, and SEO needed a new mechanism. And then in 2008, In 2008 was developed a dialogue partner mechanism, and Sri Lanka was one of the first states to obtain this status. I would say that starting from 2008, the second phase of the SEO development begins. And this stage or this phase is called like growth of the organization. In 2008, there was a high oil prices and Russia war on the rise. China's economy was demonstrated at two-digit growth rates. And starting from that period, geopolitical agenda of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization became more important for organization. Actually, China wanted to promote economic trend within Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but Moscow keeps to develop political agenda and more focus on security issues. And actually, because of this kind of position of two leaders of organization, leading states, because China and Russia considered to be the drivers of the SEO development. So this kind of position slowed down the economic track of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And I think personally that because of that, China decided to develop their own economic trend. And in 2013, the Silk Road Economic Belt concept was introduced in China. And China did it. I think China did it because they cannot do it within SEO, so they decided we do it by themselves. And this Silk Road Economic Belt originally was called a strategy, and then it was renamed in a plan, and then the 21st Maritime Silk Route was added, and then together they combined together and called Belt and Road Initiative. Later on, after the Crimea events and Ukrainian crisis, SEO shows the important signs for Russia. You know, somehow it was stipulated that Russia pay more and more attention to the East. And SEO was the main political to develop Russian foreign policy on the eastern side of the Eurasia. And it was a platform. The regional leaders could meet on an annual basis. SEO starts to play an important role for the government of Russia, of China, and Central Asian states. At the same time, we also noticed the internal difficulties within the organization. Critics said that SEO is not efficient. They said that there is no any big economic project was developed within the SEO, and it's difficult to reach consensus between the member states because their foreign policy interests actually they are different, and that is the reason for SEO to slow down. At the same time, the pressure from Western countries were felt by the SEO members. As I say, it also shows that SEO became an important player on the international arena. By that time, SEO already had like 6 member states and 3 observers and 6 partners on dialogue. And the decision was made in 2015 that India and Pakistan would join organization, and that it became the group of 8 countries. There was an important internal factor why Iran was not the first country to be added to the SEO family. And this problem was the political disagreements between Tajikistan and Iran authorities. Tajikistan leaders, they said that Iran authorities support one of the parties in Tajikistan. And that party was sponsored by Iran, and actually the leader of this party, the party was called the Tajikistan Islamic Revival Party. The leader of this party was hidden in Iran, and that is why originally Tajikistan, who supported the Iranian application to the SEO, changed his position because of these political issues. Starting from 2015, we say that the new phase of the SEO development begins. And this period required a new model and new mechanism for SEO. It required new drivers for SEO further development. And those drivers could be the trade economic cooperation. The traditional SEO areas of responsibility, like security, political agenda, and cultural relations, they developed already by 2015 for already 15 years, 14 years, and starting from that period, we needed something new. And with acceptance, new countries, we believe that something would change in the organization and would add a new impulse for the further SEO development. It's also important that in 2015, a new development strategy for SEO was introduced. And this strategy, it was oriented for the 10 years period until 2025. And the strategy says about the new level of political cooperation and the new level of economic ties and cultural exchanges, the development of science and technology and intellectual property right, healthcare, and all those new trends should be added to the SEO development. At the same time, SEO should keep multi-format regional organization. It shouldn't focus and shouldn't evolve into the military bloc or military organization. And SEO shouldn't evolve into the economic international structure. So the main idea of the new SEO, which is developing now, is a multi-format regional organization. By 2021, we can say that SEO became a fully legitimate international organization. It has its own structure and it has a high regional authority. The organization is recognized by the international community, by the United Nations, G20, European Union, and other big players. SEO plays a leading role in the region, and it means that other countries wanted to join SEO. And we know that the last summit that took place several months ago accepted that Iran finally will be the next states who will join SEO. So it was announced that the procedure of Iran to join SEO has started. And SEO became the part of all important integration initiatives in Eurasia. For example, Chinese Silk Road Economic Belt or Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, they mention SEO. The Russian initiative of the Greater Eurasian Partnership also focusing on SEO. And there was a signed agreement between Eurasian Economic Union and Chinese Silk Road Economic Belt about conjunction of those two big projects. And SEO was seen there as a platform where can be conducted this conjunction. In the modern world, SEO became the linking element between different strategies of the countries. And SEO became a key element in the structure of the new world order in the region. The same time, SEO faces several challenges or several tasks nowadays. The first one is to keep its role as a guarantor of stability and security in the region. You know, within SEO, there is another body which is called Regional Anti-Terrorist Structure. And this body is responsible for the security issues. This body has military forces, and those forces were never used. It means that SEO was successful enough not to use the military forces. SEO still have to combat three evils: terrorism, extremism, and separatism. And also SEO should be ready to react on any kind of conflicts, such as conflicts in Syria or conflicts in Afghanistan. The second challenge is extension of its economic cooperation within the member states and within the SEO family. In the transportation area, in the logistics and scientific cooperation, we have a huge potential within those countries. You know, currently, almost I would say almost 40%, 45% of the population, of the world populations are living in the SEO area. And 4 nuclear states became the members of the SEO, and those are the half of the nuclear club, of the world nuclear club. 2 largest economy, one of the largest in the world economies, India and Pakistan, India and China, are also members of the SEO, and together SEO countries accumulate 1/3 of the world's GDP product. So if we develop economic cooperation, it could boost the further development of the organization. And actually, during the meeting of the governments, heads of the governments of the SEO states in 2016, it was announced that the final goal of the SEO economic cooperation is the establishment of the free trade zone within the SEO countries. And the second challenge, the last but not the least one, is the consolidation of its position, of the member states on the world arena. Central Asian countries could deliver their voices to the United Nations, to the to the other organization, being a member of the SEO group, and they could, from the equal position, to discuss regional issues with big players such as China, India, Russia, and other. And SEO is going to coordinate position of the member states countries during their dialogue with European Union, ASEAN countries, Commonwealth of Independent States, Eurasian Economic Union and with other important players. I would stop here, and I'm ready to answer the questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kulintsev, for giving us a very comprehensive overview there in not only tracing the trajectory. That was really amazing how you looked at various stages in which the SEO has gradually grown. It has become an institution today that is widely recognized. You mentioned the GDP, you mentioned the coverage of this particular organization, the heavyweights that are coming on board with this organization. We have 2 Security Council permanent members. You now have a further expansion with the inclusion of India and Pakistan. And a couple of months ago, the inclusion of Iran as well. Now, this is where we have seen the SEO really becoming a very formidable body, a body that represents very much a great part of Asia. And this is something very positive that we need to focus on. So the floor is open. Please feel free to send in your questions to the chat box, and we will pose them to our guest speaker today. I think we already have questions coming in. Yes. So Kalina is asking the question, Dr. Kulintsev, there is a power struggle between Iran and Saudi Arabia to become a power in the Arab region. What is the impact of Iran's involvement in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization on the Arab region? Do you think that it might have a negative impact, or is there opportunity that we can find through its participation or working with the Arab region?
You know, all the mechanism of the SEO as the organization to expansion, to increase its members, the mechanism when they were developed, one of those requirements for the member states was to bring to the organization opportunities, but not the difficult issues. And when Iran was joining the SEO, not most of the member states, but all the member states, they mentioned that they look at Iran as a country with opportunities. SEO always focusing on the opportunities. In 2015, the international sanctions was disclosed from the Iran, and Iran starts its economic cooperation with the rest of the world. And it also opens huge opportunities for SEO member states. SEO countries wanted to use this advantage of the neighboring states to develop a further economic cooperation. And I think that the negative agenda or the risks that could be in the Arab region that Iran faces they are discussing on the SEO and during the meetings of the SEO member states. But how to develop cooperation mostly discussed on the opportunities which provided by each particular state.
Mm. Dr. Kulintsev, so another question is coming back, and we'll come back to discussing the role of Iran. But what is your opinion about India subscribing to Quad, the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue? Do you think that it is at cross purposes, or is it not?
India, Russia as a member of SEO states, they look on India as on a partner state. And of course, this kind of participation in the Quad is actually it's the deal of the India itself. But somehow we could say that we negatively look at the India's participation in the Quad. You know, the Quad was organized, and this idea is shared here in Russia. The Quad was organized to suppress Chinese dominance in the region. And it means that India somehow supports this idea. but within the same time, India is a member of the SEO, of the BRICS format, of the RIC format, Russia, India, China format. So here we can see that India tries to sit on the two seats, on the two chairs. And actually, India doesn't need to choose one of them. India is playing on the interests, and where it's in its favor, they participated in the Quad, when it's important for India to, for example, to develop cooperation, then India stays in SEO and works within the BRICS format. And it's a part of the current geopolitical game, the part of the current geopolitical situation.
Dr. Kulintsev, could you briefly comment on the three evils that you mentioned, which the SEO addresses: terrorism, separatism, and extremism? Do you see the situation that is developing in Afghanistan as being a key concern for the SEO going forward? We've already seen what has happened in the last 20 years in Afghanistan. Going forward, how do you think Afghanistan is going to continue having an impact on the SEO, especially because of the neighboring situation? Afghanistan is neighbor to so many SEO countries.
Your question also has the answer to your questions. You mentioned that Afghanistan is a neighboring state for so many SEO member states, and SEO family, they want stability region and security region with all your Asian territory, and SEO doesn't need any conflict, any wars in its neighbor states. That is why Afghanistan would be and remain the main focus of the SEO security agenda. And nobody wants the refugees going from the region where the war became. It's not important. Afghanistan or any other countries, all the member states, they want to create stable security situation, and only this stable situation allows to develop economic prosperity, to develop political ties, and to increase the life level of the citizens of the SEO family. So Afghanistan, of course, we cannot say that it's a problematic state, but what is happening is Afghanistan will be always in the focus of the SEO family in order to help the country to overcome this conflict, in order to establish the reliable authority, the authority that could be responsible for their works, the authority that could guarantee that they keep the situation under the control, and the other member states could discuss to start negotiations with this government of Afghanistan. Actually, for SEO members, it's not that much important who will be the leaders of Afghanistan. Afghanistan is an independent state, and the people of Afghanistan should decide themselves who will be the government of the party. And we, as SEO member states, I think like Russia and other states, are ready to discuss all the issues with the government of Afghanistan, but the government who received the support of the Afghanistan people.
Because that is where we realize that instability in Afghanistan is not to anyone's advantage. It will just cause instability in our whole region, and we don't want that. We need to take every measure possible, irrespective of what is happening in Afghanistan. As you said, whoever is forming the government, that is not the critical issue here. It is the fact that we must make sure that Afghanistan remains a stable country. It is only when there is stability in our neighborhood that we are going to see prosperity for all countries. So that's a very valid point that you raised there. So another question is coming in from Sagarika, who is asking, with regard to the pandemic, and the SEO's response to it. How has this affected the cooperation process, or has it been a boost for the SEO in the current light of what is happening?
SEO was one of the most efficient organizations in the world who quickly changed themselves and adopted new mechanisms how to communicate and cooperate in this pandemic situation during this COVID-19 issues. I remember that last year, it was the April, and the first online meeting was already organized between SEO countries. And it was their first advantage. They were first to use this technology and started to keep, the pulse of the SEO family and members. There was a mutual support between SEO member states, not on a bilateral basis, but on the basis of the SEO. SEO Secretariat already, I say, in June or maybe late July, or in July 2020, last year, they already set up the book of recommendations for SEO countries how to combat the disease. And the SEO Secretariat, they collect the experience of the SEO countries, how they fight with this pandemic, how do they cooperate, and they combine them together and spread all over. The most efficient practice, they spread all over their other countries. And that was the efficiency of the SEO mechanisms, how they work and how they exchange cooperation. From this point of view, pandemic somehow boosts digital cooperation between SEO, and SEO members understand that it's not necessary to meet like each other in person to set up to discuss any problems. We can do it by Zoom. We can do it with the same efficiency. We can do it distantly or on the keep sitting in your own countries. Yeah,
that's a very valid point. That is where the pandemic has actually taught us to evolve, to start dealing with the situation afresh. And SEO, from what you have also explained and what we have also heard, has made very bold steps forward in terms of overcoming some of these difficulties of connectivity. Today, due to the internet, we're able to connect wherever we may be in the world. Dr. Kulintsev, Achala is asking a question with regard to a concern that originates in South Asia. Now, she says, India and Pakistan in SAARC have been having a difficult relationship. The South Asian Association for Regional Cooperation has not been able to make as much progress as it would like due to the bilateral issue between India and Pakistan. Do you think that the SEO would have a similar issue when you have these two countries coming on board? Or do you feel that given the power structure concentrated on Russia and China, it can be overcome?
I would repeat that when those two countries joined SEO organization, the idea was that India and Pakistan left their disputes outside the SEO, and they use SEO as a platform to develop communication and to focus on those areas where we can work together. You know, between any states, there could be difficulties, and some difficulties they could be resolved. Some difficulties could be resolved like in 5 years, or some difficulties require some additional steps to be resolved. But there is also difficulties that cannot be resolved for a foreseeable future, and we still have to think how to deal with those kind of difficulties. And in SEO, the countries are focusing on those difficulties then which could be resolved, and they just don't want to waste like we say, waste time for the argues that never can be accepted by one side or by another side. The same time, Russia and China, we also have territorial dispute. And what Russia and China reached is that the border issues was totally discussed. And now on the officially, we don't have any claims to each other on the territorial disputes. And actually, Russia and China, we have this kind of experience how to discuss these territorial and border issues. And of course, this experience is available for India and Pakistan. And once those countries want to use this experience, this experience can be shared with the SEO countries. But the main point is that SEO is focusing on those spheres and areas where we can see the enforceable progress, where we can do something, but not just talking.
Absolutely. This is where even when you look at the dispute between India and China, there's a border dispute going on there too. That is where Kalina is asking the question, how will the Indo-China crisis with regard to their border dispute, maybe a more appropriate term there, affect the future of the SEO? Will it affect the future of the SEO, do you think?
This crisis between two big states, it's one of the largest economies in the world, and actually not India, not China, they are interested in development of this kind of crisis. And we already noticed once the crisis evolves, then a special mechanisms starts, and the leaders of the responsible authorities, they started to discuss, to negotiate how to solve the crisis, not to allow it to evolve into the conflict or into some big issues. And I don't think that this, I would say, local or bilateral issues between two countries would affect for the SEO itself. SEO as an organization has a potential, and what SEO can do, and what the India and China could receive from the membership in the SEO is much greater what India or China could receive if they have this conflict. So I believe both countries have enough wisdom not to develop further this conflict, but focusing on them, their geopolitical agenda, focusing on them, I would say, like building a new world order, which is favorable for SEO member states, which is favorable for Asian states, because you know that the center of the future world is shifting to the Asian Pacific region, and Asian countries starting to play the important role in the world issues.
And that is where I guess we realize that certain countries out there would not want to see countries in Asia working together. This is the sad reality. And certain countries, it's not on their agenda. So it does not feed into the way certain countries would think, or certain countries would want to see us working in Asia. And I guess the move by the SEO to admit India and Pakistan both, despite whatever issues those two countries may have, despite the issues India may have with China, was a very bold move, I would say, on part of the SEO, because these are all countries of Asia. And if we are going to achieve the Asian century, as this century is being dubbed, we need to all see progress, prosperity by working together there. Dr. Kulintsev, if you could touch on the dialogue partner status, and I'll come to Sri Lanka after that. But Turkey is a dialogue partner. Now, Turkey is also leading in the energy sector when it comes to the SEO countries. Turkey is playing a very big role. Could you tell us about how a dialogue partner is able to play such a big role in driving a particular sector of all SEO members?
I would say that actually the status itself, it doesn't mean that much. So actually there is not big differences between dialogue partner or observer status. They don't have that much preferences over each other. Of course, those partners or observers, they could participate in some meetings, but they still cannot do what the full members can do. And Turkey was able to get their position because of its economic cooperation with all SCO states, because of its political ties with all SCO member states. And I would say that the country, the Turkey, their own like ties on all spheres, cultural, economic, and political, and that what helped them to get those positions, but actually not, of course, the formal. Actually, it's a formal status of the partner of dialogue or observer of the SCO.
Mm-hmm. When we talk about Sri Lanka, and this is a question that has come in, which is asking, Sri Lanka has been a dialogue partner since 2009. What is the potential for this country to become a full member in the next 5 years? Is that possible, or do we have to make sure that we first become an observer and then become a full member? What is your take on that, Dr. Kulintsev?
You know, there is a requirement for observers and for partner of dialogue to be the full membership, and it's important. I think it's possible for observer and even for partner of dialogue to be directly the full memberships. It doesn't require. It doesn't require like to go all the first two steps, but the requirements are. The country should be located in Eurasia, which is okay for Sri Lanka, and it should be this. The country should have the status of observer or dialogue partner, and the country should have diplomatic ties with all SCO member states and cooperate with them in all areas, like political, economic, cultural, in security areas. So there should be the area for communication, the field for further development. The country should not be under the sanctions, what was the case for Iran till 2015, and the country shouldn't be in the state of war or military conflict with any of SCO states. And those are requirements for the country to be their full member states. And formally, there is no any obstacles for Sri Lanka to become to obtain a full membership for the organization. Of course, the next step and the most important is the decision of the heads of the SEO, and you know that the decision in SEO is taken on the unanimous status, because all of them should vote for it, and even only one country would oppose it, the decision is not taken. And to tell the truth, it would be difficult for Sri Lanka to prove or to show that that high level of cooperation with all SCO states. But negotiations should be discussed during with the political leaders, because the acceptance of the country like Sri Lanka into the SCO actually is more about the politics. It's a political step, because you know the size of the economy, of course, is not the main. I would say it's not the main argument for Sri Lanka to be invited to be accepted to the SEO is a full membership. It's the first. And the next, SEO is in the new phase of development. And SEO members should decide how they are going to work with already extended format. It was difficult to reach an agreement within 6 countries. It's much more difficult to reach an agreement within 8 countries, and now with Iran with 9 countries. So maybe my personal focus that SEO maybe would change the principle of taking decision, and this is discussed within the organization. Because if SEO doesn't change this principle of taking decision, they would never to settle all the difficult issues. And it was difficult to get any decision because of the so many players. And after this mechanism would be changed, then it will open for SEO the opportunities to increase for 10 countries, for 15 countries, to increase its membership as much as possible. And yeah, actually in 2003 years ago, I thought that SEO for the next 5 years would not extend anymore. But you know, now we know that Iranian has started the procedure of accepting to the SEO.
Exactly. And that's where Sri Lanka, as you mentioned, has good opportunity, good potential of joining at the current stage. But some of the roadblocks that you mentioned, you've got to have very sound, very solid diplomatic connectivity with all SEO members.
Yeah.
When it comes to Central Asia, that may be an issue. Sri Lanka has diplomatic connectivity, but not missions. We don't have resident missions in those countries, and also they don't have resident missions in Sri Lanka, which is very unfortunate because Central Asia is growing very fast. Central Asia has huge potential. Central Asia is really burgeoning in terms of growth and prosperity, and countries should be looking to work much more closely with such countries because of the fact that not only is the opportunity, but we're all in the same neighborhood. And this is where neighbors need to realize the importance of a neighborhood in the wider picture. So that was a very valid point that you raised there. Dr. Kulintsev, I think we're coming to the end of our session now. Thank you so much for giving us not only a clear overview, a very comprehensive detailing of the SEO, but also addressing questions, some which might be considered quite sensitive when you look at the members. But thank you very much for addressing those questions, because it is strongly felt that the SEO has much potential. And I'm not saying it just because you are joining us, but because of the fact that the SEO remains under the radar. People don't discuss the SEO much, certainly in our part of the world. The SEO is discussed very much amongst the main members, but this is where countries probably don't realize the huge opportunity that lies within a grouping. I remember it was in 2015, President Xi Jinping talked about a security wall around the SEO members. It was a security blanket. He wasn't talking about a physical wall, but he was talking about guaranteeing security. And from a Sri Lankan perspective, that is something amazing when you look at it, because we are a country that has faced terrorism, we've faced extremism, we've faced lots of violence in the past. You are quite well aware of that. And this is where, going forward, countries coming together, looking at cooperation, economic, trade, investment, very important areas, but the security dimension also remains very valid there. Dr. Kulintsev, in closing, when you look at the SEO is at a very important milestone this year. If you count it from 2001, when you had the Shanghai Cooperation Organization coming in, it's 20 years. But if you go to 1996, when the Shanghai 5 started, it's 25 years. But going forward, in the next 10 years, where do you see the SEO going?
Yeah, there is another question, whether the SEO will exist within 10 years. And the question is yes, of course, because some people, they say that SEO is not efficient, so it should stop its operation. But actually, SEO is important for Russia. SEO is important for China, and especially for China because it has the name of the Chinese city in the organization. The secretariat is located in China. and China was one of the founding states of the organization. But also we also noticed that SEO somehow became not that interesting for China from the economical point of view. And I mentioned during my presentation, they tried to develop economic track within SEO, but SEO reacted not that fast, and China decided to develop it by their own. But still, geopolitical agenda, geopolitical track of SEO became the most important one. And SEO became transformed and is transforming into the one of the important pole of the new world order. And like from my perspective, in 10 years period, in 10 years, SEO just increase its power and increase its ability to be one of the key players on the world international arena in the geopolitical sphere.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you very much, Dr. Kulintsev, for your time today, for giving us of your very valuable experience. You've done research into this area. Thank you for sharing those views and for responding to all the questions that were sent in. Thank you very much to you for that. On behalf of the Awarelogue initiative, we're extremely appreciative of you taking time to join us on the Awarelogue Lecture Forum. Also, our thanks are due to Rostislav and the Embassy of the Russian Federation for making it possible for us to make this connection with Dr. Kulintsev. Thank you once again. And thank you to everyone who joined us on this particular session of the Awarelogue Lecture Forum, where we marked an important milestone, a significant anniversary of an organization which Sri Lanka can have a lot more to do with, can gain a lot more from, and can contribute towards as well. It's not only the gaining process, Sri Lanka also has potential of contributing to this particular grouping. So thank you once again for joining us at this particular session of the Awarelogue Lecture Forum. Please join us again next time on the Awarelogue initiative, when we bring you another issue within the realm of international relations and understand its impact, the potential, and the scope for the future. Thank you, Dr. Kulintsev, once again, and have a pleasant day over there in Moscow.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.